virtual event with David Schmader and Erica C Barnett for her book, Quitter. We are recording this event and it will be viewable on this webpage after the event concludes if you have to leave early. We're delighted to be here in this virtual space with the rest of our Books in Common folks, Madison Books in Seattle and Paulina Springs in Sisters, Oregon. Before we get to Erica and David, we wanted to point out a few things about this virtual space. First, there's a buy button on the bottom of the screen so you can show your support for these authors and Books in Common by purchasing your book from one of our sponsoring stores. If you have any questions for the authors and speakers as we're going through the event, there's also an Ask a Question button down there. So we'll get to them as time allows towards the end of the evening. You can also see the questions that other folks have asked. So if you want to see if someone already asked your question, take a look. And if you're just dying to know the answer to a question someone's asked, you can upvote that question. You can also leave comments in the chat window to the right. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we recommend you first try refreshing your browser. You can also switch to the Google Chrome browser. And we do recommend trying headphones to fix any sound issues. We do want to remind you that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone joining us this evening and ask that you be respectful of everyone who's joined us tonight. Offensive comments and/or questions will see the user dismissed from this space. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tom from Finney Books in Seattle.
Thanks, Jessica. That's right, I'm not from either of the three stores, Madison Books, Paulina Springs Books, or the Country Bookshelf. I'm from Finney Books, which is the sister store of Madison, and I'm here in the back of the store. And I'm welcoming two Seattle writers whose names may be familiar to you if you, like me, read The Stranger, the Seattle's all-weekly, semi-religiously for years. We're here to talk about Quitter, a memoir of drinking, relapse, and recovery by Erica C Barnett, whose snide asides the New York Times last Sunday compared to Fleabag. That was pretty great. And joining Erica is writer and performer David Schmader. Erica is joining us from Seattle, while David is dialing in from his hometown and his home once again of El Paso, Texas. And the format for this evening, I'll introduce Erica and David a little more in a sec, and then I'll step aside for their conversation. Actually, first, Erica's going to read a bit from Quitter. And then after about half an hour or so, I'll pop back in for the question and answer session. And as you can see, there's a chat box on the right of the screen, and you can post questions there. And I'll likely have a few questions for Erica and perhaps David myself. So Erica C. Barnett is a Seattle-based political reporter. She started a career in Texas at the Texas Observer, founded by Molly Ivins, and went on to work at the Austin Chronicle, Seattle Weekly, and The Stranger. And now she has her own blog, The C is for Crank, where she covers addiction, housing, poverty, and drug policy. And she is a very good Twitter follow, I should add. In my house, basically we get our local news through the ECB Twitter feed.
Nice.
And perhaps most importantly for tonight's discussion, she got sober in February 2015. David Schmader is a writer and performer devoted to exploring his obsessions from homophobic rock stars and conversion therapy to cannabis and trash cinema. From 1998 to 2015, Schmader was a staff writer and editor at The Stranger, where he wrote the issue opening column and the first thing I always read, Last Days, the Week in Review, for 18 years. His solo plays, Letter to Axel, Straight, and A Short-Term Solution to a Long-Term Problem have produced in Seattle and across the United States. And in 2016, his book Weed, The User's Guide, was published here and in the United Kingdom. And I should also add to David's resume that he has constructed a second career as a commenter on Paul Verhoeven's trash masterpiece Showgirls, which he has performed in theaters, living rooms, and at least one wedding that I know of, as well as on the deluxe DVD edition of the movie. So I think I'm going to leave it to you guys. And Erica thought she would read something from the very beginning of the book. So enjoy. I'll be back in a bit.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to just read a short reading. It's the very beginning of the book, so this is the prologue, and the title is Rock Bottom. I wake up slowly, like I'm coming out of anesthesia. Something's not right. This isn't my bed. It isn't even my room. I'm lying on the hardwood floor just inside the door of my one-bedroom apartment. My bag is a few feet away, wallet, glasses, and makeup spilled across the room. My hot pink felt jacket is twisted underneath me, and my keys are on the floor by my head. I notice a red splotch of blood on the floor. What the hell? I sit up sharply, the room careening around me. Clutching the walls, I stagger to the bathroom, stumbling over a pair of boots discarded in the entryway. I rub the mascara out of my eyes and look at my reflection. Is that a black eye? And why is my lower lip split down the middle? As I peel off my clothes and crawl on top of the bare mattress, I piece the previous day together. At some point in the afternoon, I walked to the Busy Bee convenience store across the street from my apartment and picked up my usual liter of morning wine. These slim cardboard bottles seem to have emerged in the late 2000s as a gift from the booze merchants to bus drinkers and other sneaky alcoholics, as innocent looking as a box of coconut water and the perfect size for stashing in a purse. I waved off the owner's concern about my bandaged hand, an injury from an aborted hike in the Cascade Mountains a few days earlier, and shuffled out into the sunlight as quickly as possible, pushing my huge tortoiseshell sunglasses back over my puffy eyes. I planned to walk to the train stop near my house and head downtown to pick up some of the stuff I'd left behind a week earlier at the magazine where I used to work. Instead, I ended up sitting on a bench near the train tracks, drinking the cold, sour wine and calling everyone I knew, and many I barely knew at all. Yeah, I sniffled to the former mayor. Things are pretty shitty right now, but maybe this is the wake-up call I needed, you know? Struggling not to slur, I told an ex-boyfriend I hadn't contacted in years. Losing my job is definitely the worst thing that ever happened to me, but I'm going to meetings, I'm doing the things I need to do, and I'm really trying to make the best of this. My friend Sandeep, who was kind enough never to mention the $6,000 I still owed him, was uncharacteristically quiet as I went on and on. What do you think I should do? Go back to rehab? Leave the state? I mean, do you think this might be the kick in the butt I need to get my shit together? I'm sure he answered. I didn't listen. Eventually, it started raining, and I was almost out of wine, so I got on the train. I sent a quick text to Emily, the office manager, to let her know I was on my way, then shut my eyes. My phone buzzed angrily in my hand. It was Emily texting. You were supposed to be here an hour ago. You are on some seriously thin fucking ice with me, I thought. Emily was supposed to be my friend. For a while, she and Melissa, one of the top bosses at the magazine, had taken me to AA meetings at lunchtime. In fact, Emily and Melissa were the ones who had driven me to detox a week earlier, dropping me off sobbing at Fairfax, a lockdown mental hospital east of Seattle, in a leafy suburb that I had come to think of as the city's rehab annex. I thought they cared about my well-being. But as soon as I had gotten back to work after a 4-day detox that dried me out just enough to start to panic, I was told that I no longer had a job. Melissa had helped make that decision. And now, 3 days later, Emily was waiting for me to come and clear out my desk. You knew, I fumed. You knew when they took me to Fairfax that they couldn't wait to get rid of me. I took my time getting to my now former workplace, enough time to buy another bottle at a nearby convenience store and drink most of it, ducking into alleys on the way into the office. Some people carry around an internal map of all the places they've had sex. I can map Seattle by its liquor stores, the basement-level Crest IGA supermarket by the fancy concert hall, where I saw the Monkees play a reunion show in 2013. The corner store in Delhi just up a flight of steps from my office, where a 4-pack of Gallo commanded a steep $9.99. The liquor store on 2nd and Seneca, where I once pretended not to recognize a government spokesman I knew because I was so embarrassed to be there, buying a plastic bottle of $8 vodka from behind the counter. By the time I called Emily to come and meet me, it was 5:30 and she was in no mood for small talk. Or maybe she smelled the wine on my breath and noticed that I couldn't walk a straight line from the elevators to the door. Okay, grab your stuff, she barked, standing sentry behind my desk. In my shame-clouded memory, she is tapping her foot impatiently, boring hateful holes in the back of my head. Just then, I realized that I'd forgotten to bring along anything to transport all my files and memorabilia, accumulated over 15 years in reporting jobs from Texas to Seattle. Where are you planning to put all that stuff? Up your ass, bitch. I don't know. I need to figure out what's important here. 5 more minutes passed as I scrambled through my papers with one eye closed, struggling to focus. Photo of me with former Texas Governor Ann Richards. I definitely need that. File of documents about a long-dead monorail project, one of the first stories I covered in Seattle. Can't let that go. Finally, Emily had had enough. Okay, you need to leave. If you want your stuff, we can mail it to you later. Indignantly, I grabbed my Rolodex and the Ann Richards photo and crammed them into my bike bag. Hours later, I would recall with some embarrassment the empty wine box I had shoved in the back of the file cabinet weeks earlier. Sulking and somehow drunker than when I arrived, I followed Emily downstairs and stormed back out into the rain. From here, my memories get patchy, like watching a film with half the scenes cut out. I walked back to the same store I'd visited an hour earlier, going through a different checkout line with a fresh container of Chardonnay. I made it back to the train, swigging away like I was invisible, and managed to stay awake all the way to my stop. I savored this small victory as I disembarked, recalling all the times a bus driver had nudged me awake at the end of the line. I started walking, then running home as the rain came down harder. I tripped, catching myself for a split second on my injured hand, and then I slammed face first into the concrete. My memory skips forward. I see a couple with an umbrella, hurrying past the drunk woman sprawled out on the sidewalk, jeans pulled down, underwear exposed. I see myself figuring out which way is up from the direction the raindrops are falling. I see myself a few blocks later, staggering, deciding whether to lie down in the bushes, wondering what the headlines would say if I died. Promising writer who refused to stop drinking gets what she deserves. Fair enough, it was what I deserved. But I found my legs and I made it home. That was rock bottom, the 4th or 5th one.
Erica C. Barnett.
David Schmader.
Thank you for reading that. That was the foreword, correct?
Oh yeah, it's all downhill from there.
I've read your book. I'm rooting for you. All right, so hello. I am catching you. This has been a press blitz of a sort where Town Hall had you with Claire Dederer, and Third Place had you with Paul Constant, and now they've got you rigged up here with me. And what's it been like running around promoting this incredibly personal and vulnerable book in the real world?
Well, as you can see, the real world consists of this, what you're seeing right here, for purposes of book tour. So, but it's, but I've been talking to a lot of people, both who are familiar with me, people who aren't, people who are in recovery, people who aren't. It's weird because the book is so personal, but I've lived with it for so long that I have kind of a distance from it. And so for people who are just kind of reading my experiences for the first time, they just have a totally different reaction to it than the way I feel about it now. So I have some distance and I can talk about these horrifying things. And, maybe this isn't a good thing. I don't know. But I feel like I can talk about them almost kind of objectively in a way now. Because it is really personal and it's harrowing and it happened to me. But it's also at this point, a lot of the stuff I talk about in the bulk of the book is 10 years ago.
Right. I would say that has to do with the immediacy of the writing, where you're just it feels like, oh my God, when you learn those facts, you imagine them as being viscerally happening to you. And we don't remember that it was 10 years ago when you have processed this with an editor.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, when I wrote it, I did try to kind of be in those moments and remember exactly, and I still can't, I can go back to all these moments really, really easily because they had a profound impact on me later. But, I tried to write it in a way that reflected what I was thinking at the time and not what I think now, which is why I'm the 2 women that I described, those aren't their real names, but I'm on great terms with both of them now. And of course, I don't think they're bitches, and of course, I am trying to make myself look as bad as I would have looked to an observer watching all that go down, but also to show you here's what I was thinking. Here's what I thought was going on.
Right. Part of the interest and excitement for me was having you, who I know purely as a journalist and like a journalist who loves journalism. And to have you tackling memoir, how did it feel taking yourself as a subject? Did you like just apply your story chasing journalism skills to yourself, or was it rustling up some new skills?
I think it was a lot of new skills. I mean, there was some journalisming going on because I had to sort of reconstruct a lot of stuff that I maybe didn't remember perfectly well by talking to people and, by like getting my own treatment records and reading all of those. And I talk about that a little bit in the book. But I think that writing about yourself, I mean, it just takes a totally different skill set. And it's one I definitely didn't have at first. In the very early drafts of the book, I think it felt sort of artificial and like I was trying to write like whatever memoirist I was sort of hot on at the time, and so I had to really put myself back in those situations and be subjective about them. And I've talked to memoirists who like will show people pages and will let people read things that they've written about them and, said, is this how you remember it? And I absolutely did not do that because I think I would lose my bravery if I did. If somebody had said to me, I don't remember it exactly that way, or, this makes, this doesn't reflect, how much my role was in this, or, that I was a jerk, or that I was actually a lot nicer than you portray me, or whatever. I wouldn't have confidence in my own perceptions of how that was at the time. And ultimately it's a memoir is a subjective piece of writing, no matter what. I mean, even if you're David Carr and you interview everybody in your life, I mean, I would say that his book, which I love, The Night of the Gun, is incredibly subjective. And it reflects his point of view in ways that like become more and more obvious as you read it more, even though he's pretending to be doing journalism about himself.
Something we talked about during our pre-talk was, that your book is entering this kind of very well-established genre of recovery memoirs and addiction memoirs, and you recommended a couple that you loved that I read, and I also like them very much. But they also kind of shine a spotlight on what feels different about yours, which is the sense that the fact of getting sober might be trying again and again and again and again. Like, just we're kind of trained to hear the word rock bottom and be like, here comes the sweet, sweet ending, because we know that's what's going to happen. And
yeah.
That's
or
the
stop
beginning
reading.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, the reason, I sold this as, and I think it is primarily a book about relapse. And I think relapse is the more common, in fact, I know it's the more common experience, both from anecdotes from people I know, as well as like just statistics about people who eventually do get sober. And particularly with women's memoirs. And I would say that, most of the memoirs that are in this genre, I mean, a lot of them are by women, and most of the ones that I have read are by women, and most of the ones that I love are by women. But a lot of them do have like 2/3 that's about, things got worse, and then they got worse, and then they got, some more worse. And then I hit this point, and the back third of the book is how their life is different now after they hit that point and after they went through that inevitable upswing after rock bottom. And that just was so untrue to my own experience, because what got me sober was not hitting some mythical rock bottom. I mean, I had hit, rock bottom at this level, and then rock bottom at this level, and then another rock bottom here, and then another here. And the thing that preceded me getting sober was actually just waking up one day and having this profound gut level realization that I was done. And it wasn't because anything had happened the night before. It wasn't because anything happened that morning. It was, I was unemployed. Every day was the same. I mean, I talk about bus drinkers. That was me. I mean, for variety and entertainment, I would go out and ride the bus, which I still recommend for variety and entertainment. I mean, not right now, obviously, but I love riding the bus. It's the best show in town. But yeah, there wasn't anything special. I just woke up and I just knew that I was done, and then I acted on it, because you can know that, and if you don't act on it, it's not real.
Right. Holy shit. Something I loved was we got to kind of work through AA meetings and assorted therapy situations in rehab with you, and something where the therapist repeatedly noted your tendency to intellectualize things.
Yes.
Which I identified with, but also was like, that's kind of like telling someone to turn off their brain and just blindly trust. And that also brings up the fact that there is a very large faith-based component in a lot of recovery situations. And you have such wonderful squirmings around faith-based things in your book. Both of us, I'm the same way, and both of us, we've written books like, we'll do any drug no demand, but throw Christianity or anything faith-based, and I'll be like, leave that filthy shit away from me. And what's your problem with it?
Well, I mean, I do think, like, I mean, I got sober largely through AA. At the end of the book, like, spoiler alert, I did AA. Okay, like that was what ultimately, and kind of going along and just saying, you know what, I think a lot of this is bullshit, but I'll just take what works and I'll leave the rest, and I'll just do the things that they tell you to do. So, I want to put that as a big caveat over all of this. But the problem with the premise of, shut up and do what we say, is that, like, particularly if you've been through trauma, if you already feel like you're a piece of trash, which I would say most people who are coming into rehab, like, rehab is not a fun vacation for most people. I mean, unless you're rich, and you don't need to be reminded that you've hurt people, and you don't need to be told that you're a piece of shit, because, like, believe me, you feel that way like every second of every day. And I think that, saying that you need to just surrender often means surrender to the higher power that is the treatment program, or, the person who is, your counselor, like my counselor that told me to stop intellectualizing, and also told me that, oh, God bless her, that one of the things standing in my way was feminism. And I remember her writing that on a whiteboard as like one of the things that was going to get me in trouble when I got out. And it's just, it's just a cover for a lot of different, like, sins, I think, in recovery programs, that you just say, well, you just have to do this and you can't ask why. And, it's a big moneymaker to say, well, you have to do this, you can't ask why. And then when you don't get sober, when you go out and relapse, saying, well, you just didn't do it right, you need to come back. And so that I am, like, violently opposed to the idea of going to treatment over and over and over and over again, because unless you're just talking about straight up detox, where it's like, you need to save your life. If you've gone to treatment, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times, you're not going to learn anything else from treatment. Like, you're just not. There's just some work you've got to do yourself. And so I met people in treatment, who'd been in treatment 19, 20, 25 times, and they just thought of it as a joke. Like, oh, I'm in treatment again, it's not going to work, but I'm sober for a month. And so it made me really, I mean, even though I actually did, and part of my recovery story is that I got a lot out of a lot of these things that I went through, including treatment, including some of the detoxes, definitely including therapy, which I recommend to all people. But I do think that it is a dirty little secret of treatment that the reason we have a treatment industry as big as it is because it's premised on failure. Like, most people have to fail out of treatment for the treatment industry to work and be as big as it is, because otherwise you'd be fixing people. And they may want to fix people, but their system doesn't work. And I think they know it.
A couple more questions.
Read over.
No, so as a reader, you absolutely come out of this book like rooting for you, but a major point of the book is the deep iffiness of this cured for life narrative. And do you feel like you've invited the world in on your fight, and for the rest of your life you will be representing sobriety?
Boy, I hope not. Because I don't feel like, like in my day-to-day life, and this is kind of why, another kind of convention of recovery memoirs that I tried to not do. And I've gotten, feedback that, oh, I wish there'd been more about your life now. But, like, my life is not an advertisement for sobriety. It's just an advertisement for, like, a normal person living a life. And that's not very interesting. necessarily. I mean, I think my life is great and I think my life is interesting, but it's not like, it's not a billboard saying this is what you can have specifically if you get sober. And so I definitely don't want to be a poster child. And also people relapse and I could relapse. And that is just a fact of this disease. And I mean, it's a relapsing condition. And I hope that never happens. But, you know, if it does, it's not like, I mean, when it happens with anybody, it's not a failure. It's exhibiting the symptom of a disease, which is relapse. So, you know, so I don't want to live my whole life as an advertisement for sobriety. I mean, I think I don't make a big deal out of it when I meet new people. If they ask, you know, I will try to be, you know, I try to be as open and honest as I can. And I think that has helped me a lot because frankly, there's a lot of people out there that struggle with addiction or know somebody who struggles with addiction and they don't feel like they have anybody to talk to. And so a lot of times I'm that person, but it's not like live like me. It's like, okay, here's what I, one person went through. And that's really all I can speak to.
Mm-hmm. All right. You've been doing this tour. Is there something that you haven't been asked that you wish you had been asked, or something that looking back on your interviews that you think hasn't gotten as much attention as it should?
That's a good question, and one I wish we had planned out in advance. Now I'm on the spot and I have to think of it. Let me think. I mean, I think, you know, I talked a little bit about treatment. One thing that I don't think people have asked about enough is why I think AA actually does work for some people and why it worked for me. And it isn't, I mean, it's partly because like I needed some structure in my life at that point because I just was unemployed. I'd gotten fired. I didn't do anything with my days. And like, you know, I mean, as everybody is discovering right now, when you have nothing to do all day, like, you know, you might want to drink, you might want to engage in like other unhealthy habits. So I needed structure, but I think the reason it actually works is that it's essentially a form of cognitive behavioral therapy done by non-professionals over a long period of time. Like every single element is there. You know, if you go to an AA meeting, like what you're doing is you're like learning to arrest your thoughts. Like that is the big thing you do in CBT, which I am also like a huge fan of. But you learn to talk back to your negative thoughts, and you learn to just like have a little bit of patience. And like, if you want to drink, okay, just wait 1 minute and see how you feel in 1 minute. And like, and meanwhile, like, you know, there's a lot of writing in AA, and there's so much writing in CBT. And so I think it is, you know, whether it's deliberate or not, because it was started in the 30s, you know, before CBT existed, I think that's what it is. And it's like a free form of that where you have to deal with a lot of different types of personalities. I don't know. I found that element of it, just talking to people, and, you know, you get to babble for 5 minutes at a time, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. I mean, you just kind of are on for 5 minutes and you say whatever, and then you're off, and then you listen to everybody else. And, you know, it can be tedious, but it's also a lot like therapy.
Yeah, no, that repetition seems to be a key part of CBT, where you have to soak in better thoughts exactly as much as you soaked in the shitty thoughts. Yeah. So just like go soak in some better thoughts of the meeting. And yeah.
Or just like, yeah, if you're thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I can't get a drink right now. Right. Like then you know, in CBT, what I learned to do is like, okay, am I going to die? No. Like what is actually going to happen? This is I'm going to be frustrated, you know, and that's sort of, and they also have like this thing called playing the tape forward, where you say, if I drink, what happens next? What happens next? Like based on your life experience. And yeah, there's just a lot of really good tools that have developed kind of collectively over time through thousands and thousands of people that I think are really useful.
Great. The final thing I'll say is New York Times review, congratulations, it was wonderful. But most importantly, the reviewer sings the praises of Josh, your steadfast best friend. Anyone who reads this book is going to come out of it in love with Josh Fite.
Good, they should.
He needs love, so hopefully lots of people will read it. Okay, we're going to hand this over to Tom and the public. Hi, Tom. Are you
Hi,
around?
Tom. We can keep vamping.
I'm here.
Yay!
Hooray for Josh.
Who's on here? So let's not be too nice.
I know. He's so David, did you notice that I have a cameo on page 102?
What did you do?
I think Erica passed out after talking to us.
Oh, Jesus. Right. I was like trying to remember what that was. Yes. Oh, man. On the floor.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Tom.
Thank you. I didn't make the New York Times.
Wait, you guys, can I tell you who called me or who emailed me that got a cameo in the book? This is breaking news, everybody. John Stossel. Do you guys remember who that is?
Yes. He was like a childhood hero of yours?
He actually was, and now he's like a Fox libertarian, but seems like a very nice guy, like in person, who knows? But he wrote me and he's like, and he thanked me for the little shout out that I give him in the book. Cause I was totally obsessed with like the consumer reporting stuff that he did when I was like 8 years old.
So I want to ask about your job. You're someone who is very good at your job. You have this great career. It was interesting, the dynamic in the book, that it almost seemed like that hurt you from a recovery standpoint, because it seemed like the fact that you were really good at your job, or even was in a way holding you back from seeing what you need to see about your situation. Was that true? I'm curious about the dynamic between your work life and your professional life, especially before they became incompatible at the end. But
yeah, I think not so much being good at my job as being obsessed with my job was a real barrier to getting sober, because I thought that if I lost my job, that was the end of my life, which is such an American way of looking at life. But I had sort of had this like very clear path for myself when I was very young. I decided I wanted to be a journalist. I, did all the things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in a row that I had to do to become a journalist. And then I became a journalist, and then I was a journalist. And I was just so wrapped up in that identity. And obviously, to some extent still am, that the idea, like I couldn't sort of rationalize to myself that, that they would be incompatible. I couldn't rationalize like going and quitting for a while, like quitting my job to go to treatment for, 3 months, 6 months, something like that. I mean, that just going to treatment at first was like, I remember I was at a detox and they were like, do you want to come downstairs after you're done, meaning go to their treatment program? It was a free treatment program. And it was run by the county. And I said, absolutely not. What are you talking about? And I left, and I immediately started drinking again. So yeah, I mean, it's, I am and was a very ambitious person, but I think the difference now is that if I have to go to work at Target, well, first I'd probably hit Tom up and see if he would hire me before I went to work at Target. I have experience.
Target probably pays even better than us.
But but that wouldn't be the end of the world, because I came really close to the end of the world, which is actually like literally dying. So I'm not as wrapped up in the idea of myself as, a certain kind of person on a certain path anymore.
And I think it's probably, both can testify, journalism and drinking often, I mean, it's hard to be sober in that world, the alt weekly world, that couldn't have helped as well.
Well, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things about, and I don't know what the culture is like now, because I haven't worked at an alt weekly since I quit since I quit The Stranger in 2009. But the culture was at the time like very much, and David, like it was very much whiskey tastings, quote unquote, hit the bar at 4:00 or whatever on a Friday. And it was kind of exacerbated for me because I decided that like that was my social group, and I didn't have like a social group outside. I mean, except for like political people, but then you meet them in the bar. Like, so that's just like a journalism thing that I thought, you can't possibly meet people that when it's not over drinks, because they won't tell you things or be comfortable around you, or I won't be comfortable around them, because I was not comfortable meeting strangers, and I'm still not. But yeah, I mean, it's all wrapped up. And I think it's just the culture of journalism, but alt weekly journalism, man, it is just all about getting loaded, or it was at the time for me.
There's a question on the side. Do you still attend meetings?
I do.
Yeah.
I especially now. I have been going about once a week to a virtual meeting that lasts an hour with women, and it's great. It comes and goes. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do. But right now, like, I think all the social things that you can get in your life are just all to the good. Because like I said, I mean, I live alone, and like this is where I do my work and where I live. So talking to people.
That people are struggling with that? Just thinking about, I mean, so much of AA is that face-to-face confession and sharing, and to not have that structure, seems like it's a dangerous time.
Yeah, I wrote a piece about this that we had kind of pitched to the New York Times, and it didn't happen. So I'm gonna work on it and publish it. But I think Zoom meetings suck. I hate them. Even though I'm going, I think it's better than nothing, and it's all we have right now. But especially like at a recovery meeting, I mean, so much of it is about like holding hands and hugging and just affirmation, the kind of like verbal and body language affirmation you get. Because like a lot of times people come in and they don't have a lot of self-confidence, and maybe it's like on your first day or your 30th day or whatever, and you're sharing something that you're uncomfortable with, and then like now you're sitting in your house, you share this thing, and there's no thank yous, there's no verbal anything, it's just silent. So I mean it sucks. I mean, it's what we've got, but it sucks.
Yeah, the idea of walking into a Zoom meeting as your first meeting.
Oh yeah, and people are doing it all the time now. I mean, and people are also relapsing a lot now, I think. I mean, there's no statistics yet, but I think it's happening a ton now, because why wouldn't it? I mean, there's so much more stress.
I had a question. I think you talked a little bit about this, but we talked about, when you're first thinking of the book, we talked a little bit about it and your proposal, and there were these two elements: your story, and then kind of the reporting side, or some of the stuff you've already talked about, kind of treatment and the business of treatment. And I'm curious, in writing the book, then, how those two things, as a craft question, I think, as much as anything, how did you balance telling those two stories?
Well, I had a really good editor who I had a structure originally that was like, here's a little bit about me, and then here's the thing that I'm illustrating, or vice versa, so like, here's what is wrong with the treatment industry, and here is my experience in the treatment industry, and I think ultimately we went with a chronological memoir and kind of wove some of that information in, and then added a bunch of it at the end. So there's an afterword that's maybe like 10, 15 pages. I think that was ultimately the way to go. And my editor was great, and she eviscerated. She did a lot of cutting and pasting, and mostly cutting, and I think it worked out. But it started out probably being more half and half, and now it's more 3/4 my story and 1/4 that stuff. And I think that's a good balance. Yeah,
I mean, your story is so compelling and visceral. The idea of just dropping in some reporting in the middle of it, I can totally understand why.
This is why editors are amazing, and everybody should love being edited. Really, because I don't have that skill. Thank God.
No one. Yeah. There are a couple, I don't know if you guys can see on your screens, if you click on Ask a Question, there's a couple questions there.
Yeah, there's a question here. I'm going to jump in about, the various ways that coworkers and supervisors reacted to my drinking and its impact on my work. and how to support a coworker who may have a drinking problem. I think that really depends on your relationship with the coworker, both personally and if they're like an employee or if they are just, somebody else who works at your office. But and so not knowing the nature of the situation, I think the thing to do is not to make comments, and just to be willing to be supportive in the way that the person wants. Because the thing is about, dealing with somebody who has a drinking problem, who isn't a close relative, and who, for example, and whose drinking isn't affecting your everyday life, is that all you can do is offer to be supportive and ask how you can be supportive. Because otherwise, somebody who's not ready to quit drinking is not going to hear you. And that's just the fact. I mean, I was not ready to listen to anybody until I was ready to start doing the work on my own. So, that's a frustrating answer, but it's just the truth that there's not much you can do unless you have a close personal relationship with somebody. And then you can say, hey, I've noticed whatever. If it's something you want to talk about, I'm here. If not, totally cool. And then never bring it up again. Honestly, I know the nature of wanting to help, believe me, because I'm always wanting to fix things for other people. But with this one, you can't.
Do you see people in your life that now you've been through this? Do you have the impulse to say, well, now that you've had this path, do you feel the impulse to intervene, or do you feel less of an impulse to intervene because you've been on both sides?
Yeah, I feel way less of an impulse to intervene. I think before I was like, Little Miss Medley, and anybody who could, who I could pay attention to their problem. Even like, I think when I first got sober too, I mean, it's the process of kind of learning how to have boundaries with people. But I mean, I do really believe that people will reach out to me all the time. And I think this is true of everybody who gets sober in any kind of public way, whether it's like, at your workplace or whatever. People will see by your example that something has changed, and they will reach out to you. And for people who don't reach out, I mean, even if it's a friend, I mean, again, unless it's personally impacting your life, saying something is just most likely going to make them uncomfortable and make them not want to talk about things to you, honestly. I mean, I know that's how I felt. And I really do believe that there's this thing called internal motivation to change that happens with people when they decide to get sober. And it's internal, and it's not something you can force by saying, hey, I think you have a drinking problem. That's just, there's never any reason really to do that to somebody that you don't know really, really well. I see there's a question here about marketing, advertising, which is kind of red meat for me. But yeah, I mean, it's really, it's interesting. I sometimes debate with myself whether it's worse to be addicted to something that you have to really go out and seek, or whether it's worse to be addicted to something that is literally everywhere. I tweeted something about alcoholism, and the next ad that I got was for Knob Creek or something like that. I mean, you have to, in dealing with alcoholism specifically, it is just like an everyday active choice. And even if you are not an alcoholic, everybody in America is just bombarded with messages that like, you will be sexier if you drink, you'll have more fun if you drink, you can't have fun without drinking. If you don't drink, there's something wrong with you. And this thing is healthy. It's, there's no toxins in this delicious beverage that, we are offering to you. And I've noticed, anyway, I could go on and on. I've noticed these new like fruit flavored Budweiser beverages that are everywhere. And it like truly to me, it's just like, wow. So this is what they're marketing to 16-year-olds now. Like it starts like, so when you're so young, I mean, when I was like 15, they had they had Mad Dog in like kiwi flavor. It's so if you get out of, being an American, a young person American without having a drinking problem, I think it's amazing. But yeah, I would love it if there was some counter programming somehow. I don't know what that would be, but because it's definitely not just say no.
Yeah. The prevalence of the advertising seems really almost evil when I think about that awful fact of alcoholism where why does everybody else get to do it? Why am I the only one who doesn't get to have this all-American mainstream fun that comes in sparkly fruit flavors? And so all the prohibition just does more to make the person who is genetically predisposed to have the not be a regular happy drinker.
Yeah.
Feels like the bigger freak and wants to drink all the more.
And I truly believe that alcohol is like one of the most, if not consumed carefully, is one of the most dangerous drugs. David, you write about weed, and I am not a pot smoker, nor will I be, because I am, first of all, I never liked it. But also, I've sort of think it's safest to abstain from drugs of any kind. But man, just to compare the celebration of the all-American, beer with the way we treat other drugs. It's just, I don't know. I find it endlessly fascinating, and I call it out a lot on Twitter. So more there.
Yep. I told you this, like, I have 3 friends' marriages who have split up because of booze issues. And I feel like if it was any other drug that was ripping apart families, we would see a 60 Minutes program on it.
Yeah.
But because it's just booze, that's
their problem. That's because they don't know how to drink properly.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's an addictive drug, and it's also a poison. So consume, responsibly, but also consume with some knowledge, which you're not going to get from advertising. Anyway, I sound like Holly Whitaker. Holly Whitaker wrote a book called Quit Like a Woman. And her first 50 pages or so are just like an incendiary, just bomb at the alcohol industry. And I love her anger so much.
One of the other questions about speaking of her or other, what are some of the other recovery memoirs that you recommended to David or that you would recommend?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go I'll recommend some memoirs, but then I'll go out of genre just a little bit. I really love Kat Marnell's book, which is called How to Murder Your Life. And it's mostly about Adderall. And it has I wouldn't call it a recovery memoir because she's not in recovery. At the end of the book, it's very ambiguous. And I just find her such a fascinating character, but that book is so voicey that, I started out reading it and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can if I like this girl. And once you kind of get into the voice and you get into the way that she talks, she's kind of this New York socialite chick, and she puts on that persona really hard. It's, oh my God, it's so much fun. And really revealing about the nature of addiction. Sarah Hepola, my friend that I mentioned earlier, she wrote a book called Blackout that focuses on what blackouts are like and what they take away from your life, including time. There is a great book that was written many, many decades ago by Charles Jackson called, I am going to blank on it, The Lost Weekend. Thank you. Right, I've got a bookstore person here. Called The Lost Weekend. It is so bleak, and it is just, I love that book so much. It's a short book. It's a very bleak book about, as the title says, a lost weekend of a guy. I think, Tom, do you remember when it was written, the 20s or something?
I think I'm guessing 50s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm mixing that up with Hans Fallada, a German writer, wrote a book that I also recommend called The Drinker, that is kind of a similar vibe of desperation, and then everything ends horribly. So if you for some reason are feeling in the mood for something really relentlessly bleak, those are both really good.
Got any peppy recommendations of recovery memoirs? That audiobook of Bettyville
Oh, yes. And then Bettyville, which is not exactly a recovery memoir, but it is the story of a guy who goes to move in with his mother, who is becoming senile, and and he's kind of he is dealing with addiction, and it is like the funniest, saddest, but like literally one of those books where I was crying on one page and like laughing hysterically on the next. It's so good. And and David, you said you're listening to the audiobook and it's weirdly peppy, so maybe don't maybe don't get the audiobook.
I like minimalism in my performances, and he's a maximalist, this reader. That's why reading is good. Everyone does the lines perfect in your head.
Exactly. And you can picture everybody, and it's great.
But you have to use your eyes and brain. Audiobooks, you can just sit there.
And your hands.
Rub it in.
I'm not gonna shame people who listen to audiobooks. It's still reading, but and the woman, it was really cool. I got to play a role in picking who read my audiobook, and I think the woman that they went with is just terrific.
One more, Erica, do you feel like some of the tools that you learned through AA are useful in other aspects of your life? And actually, as a reader, that kept hitting home for me, just like I kept connecting it to stuff I was frustrated with about myself, or have you used them outside recovery in your life?
Yeah, and I would say, at this point now, about 5.5 years in, I mostly use them in other areas of my life. I don't think it's disconnected, because I think like recovery is just life now for me. But for example, I have sort of very strangely and unexpectedly become the patient person of the people I know, which is so weird and not something I ever expected. But that is entirely because of one of the tools that I learned in recovery, which is, I'm trying to say don't sweat the small stuff without it being a cliche, but just, it's not the end of the world. If you have to sit there, I had to do some travel changes when the pandemic hit, and I was on the phone literally for 8 hours at a time, just waiting for somebody to pick up. And I could never have done that before I got sober. Even before I was really drinking, I could never have done that. And now I just have a lot of patience with people, because I have a little more perspective on the fact that the person on the other end of the line is probably having a more frustrating day than I do. And I also, I think I'm a better listener, because meetings in particular really make you listen to people. And I think I just have a little more perspective and a little more knowledge that everybody is struggling with their own stuff, even if it's invisible to you. And so I try to sort of put myself in other people's shoes a little more than I used to. So yeah, I think all the tools. Oh, and then also the biggest one is, when you get resentful of somebody, one of the things that you're taught to do is make an amends to that person. So if you get in a fight with somebody and you screw up and you say something mean or whatever it may be, you apologize immediately if there's something to apologize for. And if not, you just, are nicer to them the next time or whatever it may be. And that's directly out of AA. Just, when you screw up, admit it and apologize. And I really try to do that now. Now, you might not see that if you follow me on Twitter, because I do tend to have I do tend to get in Twitter fights, and I'm working on that. But yeah, that's a pretty important tool that you learn.
And one last question from the Q&A. And this actually had kind of a question that I had as well. Did the writing flow once you decided to write your story, or was it difficult to be so revealing? And the question I had was actually from a friend. I kind of was telling her I was reading your book and telling a little bit about it. And she said, that must have been so hard to write. And my knowing you a little bit and hearing you talk about the book and knowing how fast you wrote it, you beat all your deadlines. And my first impulse was probably not, because Erica's a pro and she knocked this out. but that may not actually be true.
Well, I don't think it's because I was a pro, because I am not a pro at writing 100,000 words, at all. And I'm barely a pro at writing 5,000 words. So that was a totally new writing experience for me, but it was easy in the sense that it wasn't uncomfortable to write most of it. There were parts that were a little uncomfortable, but for the most part, I had already kind of worked through, like, this book isn't therapy, and it's not me working through things on the page and then like sending them out into the world. It really is like completed thoughts that I've already had. And so like, for example, just some of the like horrifying stories that I tell, or the $6,000 that I borrowed from my friend. Those are things that by the time I sat down to write the book, I had dealt with in some way. And like, not completely always. And there's a chapter about, just, the fact that I haven't made amends to everybody. And I certainly haven't made up for all the time I spent, passing out on people's floors and falling asleep on buses and all that. But I had processed it. And I think once you have processed something really personal internally, writing about it on the page is it shouldn't be that hard. And I really didn't find it. I mean, this sounds very arrogant, and I don't mean it to, because like I said, writing a really long book was hard. And I'm really grateful that I had an editor, but telling the stories, it was more just picking which stories to tell that sort of illustrate the points I wanted to make, because there were 10 times as many stories as could have made it in the book. So and also, yeah, it was the first book deal I've ever gotten, and I was very, very eager to get everything in early, which as it turns out was completely irrelevant, and no one cared because books have a logic and a schedule of their own. But yeah, I did write it in, I don't know, 8 months. So
But you didn't get a gold star for that? You didn't get a...
No. I know, it's so funny. Like, even now when I turn stuff in on deadline, I'm shower me with praise, like, because I know how writers are, and I know that they don't always hit deadlines, and I know that I don't. But yeah, no gold star. But then I didn't have to worry about it for a while. And then we got to the editing process, and that was another year of my life.
Well, it turned out great.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. So thank you, Erica. Thank you, David.
You're welcome, Tom.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. There's that buy button down below if you want to get Twitter. And thanks. So next Thursday, same time, same place, Sharma Shields and Steve Olson will be in conversation. Sharma wrote a novel about the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, and Steve wrote history about Hanford during World War II. So they'll be talking about fiction, nonfiction, and the mysterious doings in Eastern Washington. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.